Hello and welcome everybody to today's webinar. And hello, Elisabeth, who's tuning in all the way from the San Francisco Bay Area. So it's super early for you. So I appreciate that we are, killing your morning. And I love your mug, and coffee helps definitely. Also in the afternoon. So cheers, everybody. All right. So Elisabeth, thank you, first of all, before I start talking. And can you say something again? I think I can't.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah,
I was
there you
trying
go.
not to interrupt you. I'm so sorry. Then I panicked you because you thought my audio was gone. Sorry.
No, don't worry. It's all good. It's all good. So yeah, hello and welcome. Thanks for tuning in, people. Great to see you, everybody, virtually. And before we go on, just a few little things from the ATD side. So as you might know, we are in full preparation mode for the 15th anniversary of the Agile Testing Days this November. And we highly recommend for you to join us. We have a spectacular program, dedicated tracks like the automation track or the mental health track, lots of new speakers, new session formats, some surprises I can't tell you about right now. Great social events, a 90s party with great costumes, I hope. So it's the place to be. And if you can't come on site, we highly recommend our virtual pass as well, with over 140 sessions and live stream from Potsdam, and with special online talks as well. So it's going to be huge, and we really hope that you'll join us. If you're an alumni, tell us, or just register and you get a great little discount. Okay, so that's for me. And for everybody who's not familiar with Crowdcast, a little mini tour. You already see the chat on the right-hand side. If you have anything to say, any resources to add, anything valuable, or just saying hi, that's fine too. Just please share it there. We do have a code of conduct in place for online events. So if there's anybody misbehaving, I'm not warning you. I'm just going to throw you out. Just so you know, I'm a nice person. Yes, that's for the chat. And on the right-hand side, below the chat symbol, you see a little question mark. And that's the Q&A feature. If you have a question for after the talk, please just post your question in there or upvote for one that's already been written. And after the talk, we will go back in and just answer one by one. Should the discussion take longer, and we all have limited time, then I'm sure Elisabeth agrees, you can definitely ask the question later as well via email or via our Slack workspace, take the discussion further. So we'd like that as well. After the presentation, the Crowdcast will do the replay, or the replay will be available in this Crowdcast. And you can rewatch this anytime in your archives, any webinar you'll see. Show it to your friends, share it. You're welcome to do so. And we're happy to spread the word. All right. So now to Elisabeth. What can I say? You probably know Elisabeth. She's been around for a long time. She's just an awesome person. We are super happy that we had her at the Agile Testing Days USA this May. And she did a tutorial and also this talk. So this talk is actually a redo of the keynote. And both sessions were like among the best rated sessions. And we had so many good things people said about it. And luckily now I'm doing this webinar and I can actually watch it, because as an organizer, there's never time. So I'm super happy, not just for me, but for everybody else, that you're redoing this, Elisabeth. This means actually a lot to us. I won't say anything more. You know that she's a great author. She's a consultant. She's an agile enabler. She's just amazing. And I think that's all I'm going to say. I'm just going to shut up now and leave the stage to you. And I'll see you in a little bit. Thank you, Elisabeth.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh my goodness, I'm blushing. So I remember I started off in June in Chicago by confessing that I never know what words are going to come out of my mouth. So I'm kind of looking forward to the talk too. And that is true today too. So although it's a redo of the keynote that I did, and the slides are the same, it is entirely possible I will be telling different stories. Let's find out. Let's start by sharing my screen so that you can see it. And hopefully that's going to work. Please work, please work, please work. Okay, great. I think I see my screens. Ina, can you confirm that my slides are actually showing?
They are showing.
Yay! Okay, great. So I want to start by setting a little bit of context. First, I got to give a shout out to my friend and colleague, Mike Vizdos. It turns out that both of us were using language around focus deliver, kind of a parallel evolution. He has a wonderful, wonderful newsletter called Focus Deliver and really smart things to say. He also is the person who created the Scrum cartoons with the characters of Chicken and Pig. They're hilarious. I highly recommend you check them out. But I wanted to give a nod to him for also the focus deliver language. And then I also want to take a step back before we get into the slides and set some context on what at least I feel is going on right now in the industry. I feel like we're in this moment of incipient change. And to back up, when I entered the industry, it was smack in the middle of the reaction to the supposed software crisis, the chaos of every project was over time and under delivered and over budget. And so a whole bunch of process things had happened with an attempt to bring software projects under control. And that's where we got the very phased waterfall kind of approach. A whole bunch of technical practices around structured programming had come about. And that's when I entered the industry. And in the end game of that, the result was a whole lot of documentation and frustration, and frankly, still plenty of chaos. And that was a few years later was when people had been experimenting with lightweight methodologies. And in 2001, there was Snowbird that kind of brought together all these people who had been experimenting with lighter weight ways of working. And that gave rise to what became the Agile movement. At the time, it was incredibly controversial because it did kind of fly in the face of what the industry at that point had been thinking of as best practices. So here we are over 2 decades later. And incidentally, one of the things that somebody said about my talk in Chicago, which was very well intentioned, it was a very kind comment, but it was essentially this talk could have been given 20 years ago. And have we learned nothing? I actually think we've learned a whole lot. And I also acknowledge that none of what I'm going to say today is brand new. However, I want to set the stage, the context that I do think that we're in this moment of change where Agile is now the de facto standard. It's gone from being the edgy, sort of controversial way of working to being the way that every company works. Cue transformation. Every company is doing something Agile, something. And we've gotten to the point where there's attempts to scale Agile and. Now, at the same time, AI, the new hotness, it's very easy to dismiss AI as just a fad. But when I look back at all of the advances that led to where we are right now and the capabilities that machine learning, deep learning, large language models, that the capabilities that those advances give us, and the fact that we've now gotten to the point where those advances can be commercialized for just about any organization that's building software, we are on the precipice of fundamental changes that will necessitate revisiting how we think about delivering software. So I'm hoping today you're not going to get something that's startlingly new. I'm hoping that what you're going to get is maybe some ideas and an understanding of the why things work in order to tweak or improve your practices internally, or maybe for you just a reminder or some talking points that you can use with your organization to talk about the why things work. So let's dig in. I want to also back up to my introduction to Agile. In the very late 90s, like 1999, 2000, 2001, Brian Merrick had been talking to me about Agile, and I'd been ignoring him. And then he was talking about extreme programming and saying, you really have to pay attention to the people who are doing this extreme programming thing, and I continued to ignore him. But he was right. This is actually a theme in my entire career. Brian Merrick talks about stuff and I don't understand it at all. And then 5 or 6 years later, I go, oh, you were so right. So this was one of those. In this case, it was about 2002 or three, I forget, when I met Rob Mee at a peer conference that Brian Merrick was also at, and Rob was talking about how his teams worked, and I realized I want to go to there. I want to be on one of those teams. I want to understand this viscerally. And I did. I managed to, I refer to it as weasel my way onto one of the teams. But in reality, what happened was we agreed that it would be really interesting to experiment with me coming in as an exploratory tester. There was no such role, no such idea of such a thing in XP. But what if you had a very collaborative exploratory tester who came onto a strict XP team? How would things be different? And from my point of view, it was mind-blowing. I got to experience the satisfaction of providing value on my first day on the project. My first day was the project's second day. There was a little bit of software written, but not much. But what it did well. It didn't do very much, but the thing about XP is developers set an intention and then make the software meet that intention. And the software did what the developers intended it to do. And as Ward Cunningham would say, it was ready to be explored. So I explored it. And that first day, I found a bug that represented an entire class of bugs. And by finding it and we fixed it, that entire class of bugs was prevented. And so we never had to go fight that bug ever again because we had prevented an entire class of bugs. That first day set the tone for the rest of my participation with that particular project. It was so collaborative, and it was so amazing to me to see an effective team execute. And there were so many surprises for me and things that I didn't think would work that worked incredibly well. So fast forward, that was 2003, 4. Agile is now mainstream. So that means that there we go. That means that we live in this world, right? Everything's perfect. No problems. We've solved all of the problems. In fact, why are you even here? You don't need a webinar because everything is perfect. Well, maybe not. Not everything is perfect. In fact, I still hear some of the same frustrations that I had in the late 1990s. There are still organizations that have change control boards that are impeding the ability to get stuff done. There are still organizations that are having severe quality problems. So clearly, the transformation of the industry to agile practices with DevOps, and it didn't solve all of the problems. So if there's still work to do, let's talk about what that work looks like. And let's start by talking about what good looks like. So if we back up on Agile and we look at the 4 values with the 12 principles behind it, ultimately, Agile is about delivering a continuous stream of value at a sustainable pace while adapting to the changing needs of the business. That sounds great, but what does that actually mean in practice? And for me, it's about a smoother path from concept to delivery. So we have more reliable deliveries, both in terms of the cadence of deliveries and in terms of the quality of what we're delivering, with less friction, better collaboration, shorter cycle times. The whole shift left thing is really important. Tighter feedback cycles, lower feedback latency, and shorter cycle times. From that idea to the delivery and recognizing value from having done that work, with improved flow, fewer emergencies, fewer late breaking surprises, ultimately happier customers, and ultimately less drama. When we achieve this better world, well, actually, first I have to acknowledge that in order to achieve this better world, there will be trade-offs. So there's a joke that consultants like me, we like to say, it depends. It depends on what? Well, the reason that we say it depends is because there is no perfect world where we have solved literally all of the problems. Everything is a trade-off. So from my point of view, the very best that any of us can do is to choose which problems we want to have. So what that means is that if we choose to scale, we are now going to have the problems that come with scale. Jerry Weinberg liked to say that growth produces bigness. So if we're going to grow, now we have the problems that come with being big. If we're going to emphasize delivering features, we are at risk of becoming a feature factory. We now have to wrestle with the challenges that come from that. If we're going to attempt to serve a wide spectrum of customers, all of whom have different needs, then we're going to have the problems that go with that. But if we're going to focus on one niche, then we're going to have the problems that come with that. So no matter which way we go, there will be problems. But the very best that we can do is to choose which of those problems we actually want to have to solve. So this is the challenge for us as we think about how to adapt our business models, our practices, our processes. But if we aim for what good looks like is less drama, we end up with more choices because we have fewer situations where our hand is forced. I don't know if you have ever been in a situation where essentially you have no more choices left. There is only one path forward. Certainly, I have been in that situation in a variety of companies where, whether it's because of business decisions that were made or because time passed and we no longer have options that we might have had before, but we don't have any choices left. Now, if we have more choices, Brian Merrick, one of the other things he says is that you always want to work to optimize, to increase your choices. And it turns out that's really smart because the more choices you have, the more better strategy you can have. Now, maybe this is obvious to you. It turns out it wasn't obvious to me. I want to back up to when I learned the connection between choices and strategy. At the time, I was doing a whole lot of agile coaching and training and holding classes. And one of the workshops that I held was a workshop on building agile games to teach agile principles. And so this was a workshop for coaches where they could come in and we would talk through game theory and how to design games that would teach agile principles that they wanted to teach. So for that, I would always stock up on card games, dice games, just have a whole basically grab bag of inspirational material and really good foundational things to build games out of. So I was always on the lookout for interesting games. This is how I found myself at a Target in the US, where I went to the games section and I found some card games. And then I also found this game called Left, Right, Center. If you've never encountered this game, it involves some dice and some what look like little poker chips. And it turns out the way that the game is played is you roll the dice and you do what the dice tell you to do. Now, when I got so you do what the dice tell you to do. You roll the dice and it might say left, you move one of your chips to the left. It might say right, you move one of your chips to the right. It might say center, you move a chip to the center. But you don't actually have any choice in this. Now, I didn't know that yet because I hadn't read the game rules yet. But when I got to the front of the line at checkout and the cashier is scanning my stuff, she stopped at left, right, center, and she said, "Oh, this is my family's favorite game. You're going to love this game." I'm pretty sure that for her family, either they adjusted the rules or it was a drinking game, because I'm really not sure how to have fun with that because there's no choice whatsoever. And I realized you can't have a strategy. So for me, the fun in games is developing a strategy and learning how to get better at it. Ultimately, either to win against the game if it's a collaborative game, or to win against my opponents if it's a competitive game. But I want to be able to think about the game and develop a strategy, even if there's an element of chance. But when you have nothing but chance, you don't have the opportunity to develop a strategy because you have zero choices. Okay, so the more choices you have, the better you can develop your strategy to meet your business needs. And this becomes a really important theme that we're going to come back to. Okay, so hold that thought, bookmark that. Now, let's talk a little bit more about XP. I mentioned that first experience that I had with a Pivotal Labs team that was so, for me, personally and professionally, just transformational. I later went on to work for Pivotal for about 7 years, where we took that foundational core of XP and we essentially evolved our very particular flavor of XP, and I want to talk about it a little bit. Now, Pivotal was subsequently acquired by VMware, and so although the people who worked at Pivotal are still in the industry, and although many of the ideas that were spread by Pivotal and the products that Pivotal made are still there, Pivotal isn't quite the same Pivotal that it was once upon a time. And so, in a way, I'm describing a land far away in a time long ago. But it's important, I think, to illustrate and inform what I ultimately actually want to talk about. This is all prelude, by the way, to the actual talk. But I want to talk about how we worked, because it is useful to understand that perspective that I'm coming from. Now, since it was extreme programming, if you have encountered extreme programming, you've probably encountered test-driven development and pairing. Extreme programming has a whole bunch of very technically focused practices, continuous integration and refactoring and collective code ownership. We layered on some additional practices around the way that we sort of managed the overall project. We had a strictly stack rank ordered backlog, and the team was the agent of work. Team members picked out of the top of the backlog. They didn't go cherry pick, or Joe Beta introduced me to the term cookie lick, stories deep in the backlog. When you and your pair were ready to take on more work, you pulled something from the top of the backlog. So that's the ordered backlog. The product manager ultimately owned that backlog. So the product manager would be the one who was deciding what we were going to build and in what order, while the engineering team owned how we built it, what the architecture looked like, and how long it was going to take. The product manager did acceptance testing. So one of the reasons why we didn't have a whole separate QA organization, we did in many cases. Pivotal was a big place. We had at the peak something like 2,000 people, and different teams ran differently. There were people who were testers who integrated on teams, but there was no big separate QA department. And one of the reasons was because the product managers were so deeply involved in doing acceptance testing. The product manager was the one who said what, and so they were the best person to decide whether or not they got what they asked for. So acceptance testing was a big part of our process. And then in terms of the meetings, we had incredibly limited meetings. Our stand-ups were 5 minutes a day. If it was going to go longer than that, then usually it was something that needed to be taken offline. Our iteration planning meetings were an hour. For a very complex thing, we might end up with a little bit more. Our retros were an hour every week. And then we would do these meetings called inceptions, where we would plan out the next chunk of work, like roughly 3 months worth of work, so that we had that larger arc that we were working towards. But these are the set of practices that we followed. We were an execution machine. So from that very first project that I worked on in 2003 or 2004, where I saw that things worked incredibly well, but I didn't understand why. We did things that honestly at the time I didn't think would work. We had high turnover on the team. I expected it to turn into a disaster, and yet everything kept humming along. I really didn't understand why. And so this led me to do a lot of internal self-reflection to really deeply understand what is going on here. So I thought about test-driven development, and I realized, wait a minute, this isn't just, it's not about testing, first of all. Test-driven development is a design practice. As a developer, when I'm practicing TDD, I'm not thinking about testing. I'm not thinking about all of the ways in which things can go wrong. In fact, this is one of the reasons why, for me as a developer, TDD is tremendously powerful, because it allows me to take my brain, which is otherwise all over the place with, what if it did this, and this could go wrong, and I need to handle this corner case, and just focus on step, literally one step at a time, not even one thing at a time. All I'm doing right now is trying to express a single intention, a single tiny aspect of behavior. I'm expressing that in a test. How will I know that I got that behavior? And I'm making design decisions like, do I need a separate method that's going to implement this behavior? Should this be in this class or that class? Which class is going to be responsible for this behavior? I'm setting a tiny intention and then I'm watching that, expressing it in a test, watching the test fail, super critical step. And then I'm making that test pass by changing the underlying code base. And then I'm refactoring. And then I'm doing it again and again. And for me, it allows me to focus. It's got another level of focus. It helps me get back into flow. When I'm going to step away from my code for a little bit, I can leave myself a breadcrumb. I can leave myself one red test. So then when I come back in, I don't have to reload the entire context of the project. I have to do is make that test pass, and then I can do the next and the next. So test-driven development as a design approach, it provides so much focus. And then pairing, I thought about pairing and how well pairing provides so much focus, because when I'm pairing with someone else, first of all, my phone isn't in the picture at all, and I'm not constantly checking my email, and I'm not distracted by Slack. But also, when we were in an open office setting and somebody walked over and had a question, one member of the pair could address the question and the other one kept going. And then when the question was answered, the other pair would turn and the first pair would catch them back up. So now they're back in flow. And so that whole interruptions are a huge problem for software developers. That kind of evaporated. We were able to focus and get back in flow. And then I thought about stand-ups. Stand-ups, when done well, are a coordination point. They're not a ritual. They're not a status report meeting. Honestly, you should be able to get status at a glance by looking at the artifacts in the project. So a stand-up, the entire purpose is, hey, we're a team. What are we hoping to get done today? And how do we need to coordinate in order to make that outcome a reality? So it's about focusing on just today instead of focusing on all of the potential problems at any point in the future. Okay, what are we doing today? So it really becomes that focal point. And the ordered backlog becomes a focus. It doesn't matter what's farther down. If we're not going to get to it for another 2 weeks, we're not going to think about it. Other than not painting ourselves in an architectural corner, we're not going to be stupid, but we're going to really focus on what we're trying to deliver this week. So that focus came through with all of our practices. And then I thought about practices and delivering, and of course, continuous integration supports us in delivering software, and collective ownership supports us in delivering because we don't have a single point of failure, a single person who is the only one who owns this part of the system, and they go on vacation and then nobody can do anything in that part. So collective ownership supports delivery, and acceptance testing supports delivery. And this starts to explain why we were a delivery machine. We could deliver value incredibly effectively. And then I thought about learning. You begin to see where the title of this talk came from. Retrospectives enable us to learn from our experiences so that we can continuously improve. And for that matter, pairing and stand-ups, they're opportunities to learn as well, learn from other people. And collective ownership is a way, it provides us a way of learning from other people because we learn about the whole code base, the context, we learn about areas of the business that we might not have understood, and the business rules that are in the code base. And then sustainable pace, that practice of making sure that we can keep doing this, that allows us to repeat this. And ultimately, I realized that what we're doing, regardless of your agile methodology, the reason that what we were doing worked was because we were doing focus, deliver, learn, and repeat. It's a cycle over and over and over again. That was the essence of what we were doing. That same cycle can apply in any organization, even ones that are not doing XP. XP is, I think, a fantastic way to work, but I fully recognize that despite the fact that Agile has won, XP is a little bit niche. Not every organization does XP. A lot of people don't want to do pairing. And test driven development requires an enormous amount of discipline that, frankly, not every organization is going to be able to support. But focus, deliver, learn, repeat doesn't rely on any specific practice. It is not specific to XP. So, how do we think about these principles in the context of any organization, regardless of the process that organization follows? So, let's talk about focus, and let's talk about all of the sources of distractions. And maybe it's a good time for you to be thinking about your organization and what feels like a distraction to you. Organizations where there are flaky tests and developers think that they have delivered value and then the build goes red. But the reason the build goes red has literally nothing to do with the code that they just produced. Or maybe there's work coming sideways from the organization in 17 different directions, and an individual, a team or an individual developer is basically left to their own devices to figure out what's actually important. Or maybe there is a temptation to say, well, while I'm here, I have this file open. While I'm here, I'm going to go add these bells and whistles that we've been talking about for a while. Maybe there are a lot of interruptions. Maybe there's a bunch of untested features that have a carrying cost that feel like distractions. Maybe there's a whole lot of unshipped inventory. Everything's in flight. Nothing is done. We don't have any work in progress, WIP limits. There's a temptation to believe that code is an asset. Code is a liability. It ages, and it by itself does not have value. The only time it has value is when it actually delivers business outcomes that matter for the organization. And so all that unshipped inventory becomes a distraction. There are so many of these distractions. So focus isn't, however, about ignoring the distractions. If you exist in a context where there are a lot of interruptions because you have support cases, it is not the responsible thing to ignore customers and say, well, I'm focused on this right now, I'm going to ignore you. No, focus is about creating a distraction-free context, a context in which it is safe to just do the one thing at a time. And if you exist in a context where all of these distractions exist because the organization got this way, it's not yet safe to ignore those distractions. So now the work is to clear away the things causing distractions. And Nat Bennett tells my favorite story about this. If you ever get the chance to hear Nat Bennett tell it, Nat would tell it so much better than me because they have all of the details. But I'm going to tell the short version. Nat found themselves on a team, an SRE team. And when they walked in, the team was getting these alerts multiple times a day. And in practice, the alerts are just on a computer monitor, alert something's going wrong. But I always visualized this when Nat was telling the story as like red sirens running in the background and just whoop, 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 whoop. And people are trying to work in this context of these things whooping around them. But the thing that Nat noticed was that every time somebody went to address one of these sirens, it was a simple matter of just dismiss it because there was nothing to be done. There was no change that the SRE team could make. It was a spurious alarm. Maybe the alarm didn't mean anything by itself. Maybe it was just an indicator things might go badly in a way that may need attention at some point in the future. So it's not that there was zero information there and you could turn them all off, but they didn't add a lot of value. And so Nat calls it using the snowball strategy to pay off technical debt as opposed to tackling the biggest problem first. Nat was the team lead and directed the team to tackle the smallest problems, the ones that are easiest to take care of, and then used that time to tackle the next biggest problem and did a snowball on the technical debt to get to the point of creating an environment where it was actually safe to focus. It's not that they ignored the alarms, because that kind of red blindness or alarm blindness can lead to catastrophic outcomes. Instead, Nat led the team to create a context in which the spurious alarms didn't happen. The sources of interrupt that were not helping them do a better job simply didn't happen. That is such a perfect example. That carving back time is such a perfect example of creating a context in which it is safe to focus. That again doesn't rely on any specific agile methodology, and in fact isn't about agile at all. It is simply about taking the time, which requires a lot of internal discipline, taking the time to responsibly remove the sources of distraction. Another example of removing sources of distraction is taking smaller steps in development. An engineering manager had been tasked, their team had been tasked with creating a new microservice in the context of a legacy system. And in theory, their first release was supposed to be this small little release that did, and then there was a whole list of capabilities that the new thing would have. And what they found was they were struggling to release because there was always one more thing that they hadn't talked about, hadn't figured out yet. And so it just kept kind of growing. And the engineering manager was getting very frustrated. They did a really smart thing. They said, hold up. We don't actually know what friction we're going to run into trying to put this new microservice into production. This is a relatively new thing for our organization. We previously had a giant monolith. So what if we ship a microservice that doesn't actually do anything yet? It's a walking skeleton. As far as I know, Alistair Coburn is the person who coined the term walking skeleton. And the idea is that it performs a small end-to-end function. It might just simply pass traffic through. It does the absolute barest minimum. It doesn't yet provide any business value other than showing that we can get this thing into production. And so once the engineering manager redirected the team to just deliver that, that's an example of focus. Just focus on delivering a thing and getting it to production. And all of the rest of the stuff we're going to take care of later. Focus on that. Then it turned out that every new capability that they added was super easy to add. They just added it to the code base. Then they had an entire pipeline that resulted in it showing up in production. So that's another example of narrowing the focus and turning into an execution machine as a result of doing so. Okay, so now let's talk about, that's also a story about delivery. Let's talk about delivering. And here's the thing that so many organizations do, regardless of their process, is confusing speed and progress. There is it's the same as confusing output and outcome. There is a temptation to focus on the thing that we can measure, and that's usually output. And so there's just such a temptation to say, well, we merge the code. So look how fast we can merge code. Look how fast we can pick up tickets. Look at our velocity. Look how fast we deliver, except the delivery isn't all the way delivered. And so when we optimize for delivery, it's optimizing for all the way through. And that walking skeleton story is a great example of that. It wasn't enough to finish the code. We had to get all the way through to the point where users could actually use the code, finding the friction points along the way, and then optimize for delivery all the way through. I remember walking into an organization that was practicing extreme programming, and it was such a delight to get to explore this particular new service that they were about to publish. This wasn't not a microservice; it was a new capability for their web application, and it was a kind of fun capability. And so I had a whole lot of fun playing with it, and the developers were very proud of their work, and rightly so. They had done a fantastic job. The thing that happened next, though, was they were trying to get it into production, and there had in their organization such a big wall between development and operations. And up until that point, they had been thinking, we're focusing. We're not dealing with the distraction of operations. We're focusing on building the code, and then we will worry about getting it into production. Um, it took 2 months to get it into production after they finished. They finished the code in like 6 weeks, and then another 2 months to get it into production because they didn't know what they didn't know. And so, although focus is really important, optimizing for delivery all the way through is also super, super important. As tempting as it is to say, oh, well, I'm focusing, I'm not going to worry about that. It's so important to be able to do that thin, that steel thread all the way through to delivery, and then build from there. And that's one of the things that I learned working at Pivotal, where we had to be continuously delivering capabilities all the way through to production. Another example of that is a big bang rewrite that I saw where, again, it's so tempting to fool ourselves. So here's a situation where there was already a V1 in production. There was a V2 that was under development. The V2 wasn't anywhere close to baked yet, but the engineering team that was working on it was very proud that they shipped every Tuesday and Thursday. So they were shipping near continuously. Not quite continuously, but I mean every Tuesday and Thursday. That's not bad at all. It was several months later that I found out that although they were theoretically shipping and the code was on the VMs, the code wasn't actually running and no traffic was going through any of the V2 components. And so they were shipping, but they weren't, and they were fooling themselves. They genuinely believed that they were doing something akin to continuous delivery. And what they hadn't done was to think about sequencing that work so that they actually could be turning on pieces one at a time and get the value continuously. So, as you think about optimizing for delivery, again, the definition of delivery matters, and being able to get the value out that's the moment where you get to declare victory, not the moment where one function is done with the thing that they think that they're supposed to do. Focus, deliver, learn, getting better with every single delivery. If you do no agile practices whatsoever, the first one to adopt is retrospectives. I used to run these workshops where we would do an agile transformation in a single day in a simulated sandbox kind of context. And what I discovered was that even if I had not introduced anything at all about agile practices, XP, anything about that, inevitably, as long as the people going through that simulation were doing a retrospective, and that was kind of baked into the way that the simulation worked, we would do some work and then reflect and adapt, and then do some work and then reflect and adapt. They reinvented agile practices, but through the lens of how do we improve, not through the lens of here's a practice that we should adopt. In fact, some of the most hilarious fails that occurred in that workshop that I ran over 150 times happened because somebody had just been to some other training class and said, I know, we should adopt stand-up. And then they would spend all of the work time doing stand-up and talking at each other and not actually delivering anything in the simulation. So the point of a retrospective isn't to say, I know we should adopt practice. It's to reflect on how things are going and have an open conversation about how we can improve. There are so many different ways to do retrospectives. I don't actually care how you go about doing this. There's the traditional happy, meh, sad structure. There's start, stop, continue. There's like, lacked, learned. If you use Miro, I use Miro. I love Miro. This is not a plug for Miro because I have any vested interest in Miro other than I love the product. But if you search retrospectives in their templates, you'll find so many. And you can generate the ideas. That's the categorization stuff. You can generate those ideas before the meeting, in the meeting, asynchronously, silent brainstorming. You could facilitate these any number of ways. There's a whole bunch of ideas in the book, the wonderful, wonderful Agile Retrospectives book by Esther Derby and Diana Larson. So the point isn't that you do the retrospectives in a specific way. It's that they are the place where you and your team work together to reflect on how the last increment of time went and decide what you want to change in order to do better in the next increment of time. And if you do this well, then if you ask yourselves, do our retrospectives result in us making meaningful adjustments to how we work? The answer will be yes. And if the answer to this question is no, then it's a ceremony, and a ceremony that's probably not a very good use of y'all's time. And so that the next retrospective I would suggest would be how reflecting and adapting on how you run retrospectives. And again, the ideas come in that for how to do that from Esther and Diana's book are a wonderful resource. Okay, so then we got to do it again and again and again. Repeat. If you think about the process that you're following right now in your organizations, and you think about, is this sustainable? How long can I keep going? I know an awful lot of professionals who feel like they're approaching burnout. The thing about sustainability is that it should be something where you actually aren't feeling that slow slide or fast slide into burnout, exhaustion. The theory is that it is something you could keep doing indefinitely. And I would suggest that if you're starting to feel like we're getting tired, it's a slog. People who are in feature factories report it feels like a slog. People who are in organizations where there's a huge amount of friction to get anything delivered feel like they're in a slog. People who are in organizations with a massive amount of technical debt, and every week there's a new escalation, angry customer, angry stakeholder, feel like it's a slog. If that's you, then I'm going to suggest that one of the things you want to bring back to your organization is this idea of what do we have to change? What do we have to do differently in order to get to the point where we are sustainable? We could keep doing this forever. So let's back up. What we've been talking about is focus, deliver, learn, repeat. Okay. Now let's talk about something different. The Kolb learning cycle. So the Kolb learning cycle, it comes out of education theory. And the idea is that whenever anybody is learning something, they're going to experiment, have an experience, observe and reflect on that experience, and then abstract the learnings out to run their next experiment. And it turns out that focus, deliver, learn, repeat fits perfectly into this. So if you're able to get your organization to the point where you can consistently focus and deliver, and then learn from that experience and then repeat, you've created a learning organization. Your organization, when we started, I said, we are at the precipice of immense change. Honestly, the shift that we're hitting, where AI is a fundamentally different thing than developing a completely deterministic code. We've essentially come back to the point where code is a black box. And that is going to require us to adjust how we think about our processes. But if you think in terms of becoming a learning organization where you focus, you deliver, you learn, and then you can do that indefinitely, then you're well poised to tackle whatever technology has in store for us next. All right. That brings us to the end of what I was prepared to talk about. And I'm going to turn things back over to Ina, I think, in order.
Hello. Hey, you're so small. Let me make you hang on, like this. And I'm going to throw out the screen share as well. Nice. All right. Thank you, Elisabeth.
Thank you.
So did the coffee help or the talk itself? Because it was really good. Thank you. Because you said earlier that the coffee didn't really kick in yet, but I didn't feel that at all. So thank you so much. Really, thank you so much. And we do have actually 2 questions in store here. If there's any other questions that you're kind of holding up on, now's the time to put them in the Q&A box, please. So I'm just going to start with a new one, with the first one, which is from Elisabeth. Hello, Elisabeth. What do you do when a change you suggest, for in brackets pairing, for example, is seen as too extreme to try by the team?
I don't force them is the short answer. So one of the things that I did at Pivotal, you might think that process that I described, like we just did that out of the box. Well, Pivotal Labs did, but Pivotal, the larger company, the one that was like 2,000 some odd people, was actually a huge merger acquisition situation with teams coming from all over. And one of the things that I ended up participating in a lot was rolling out a way of working that was more aligned with the original Pivotal Labs process to a lot of parts of the organization that were not ready for it. And I had to learn how to meet people where they were. And so the thing I would back up to was the fundamental principles, the problem that I was trying to solve from a leadership perspective, or the principles that I was trying to imbue in the organization. And so instead of starting with pairing, and incidentally, I screwed this up in the very beginning. We lost some really good people in one part of the organization that I wish we hadn't lost, because they're like, pairing, no, peace out, I'm gone. I don't want to pair. But when I did it the next time, instead of saying you must pair, we're going to start pairing. Let's try pairing. Oh, come on, you can try pairing, and trying to coerce them. Instead, looking at, okay, here are the things that pairing would give us. What are your ideas for how we could achieve that? And what if we did end up experimenting with some ensemble programming in some cases for very specific narrow purposes, like we're starting a new piece of stuff that we need a new architecture for. What if we do some ensemble work just to establish the architecture, and then people can go off independently? And so what I would say is, if you're getting that feedback too extreme to try, I would channel my inner Dale Emery. Dale has a wonderful saying that resistance is a resource, and that they're telling me something, and I need to listen to that. And then I can offer back, okay, how about if I explain what I value about pairing, and then we can talk about maybe how we could adapt what we're doing to take into account these things that I want to achieve. And it might be the learning piece of it. It might be the focus piece of it. It might be supporting the notion of collective code ownership. Oh, well, that's too extreme. Okay, well, let's talk about that one. And maybe we will find between all of us one small change that we can try, that then that becomes a catalyst for the next set of changes. But I'm always building it from the underlying principle of why all of this works, of focus, deliver, learn, repeat.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Elisabeth. If not, please just post another question if you want.
All right. Hi, and good to see you, Elisabeth.
So the next one, oh, I know that one. Michael Kutz. By the way, he's doing a great workshop together with another great friend of mine, Christian, at the ATDs. So hi, Michael. Will be great to see you again. Anyway, so that question. My greatest experience of Flow so far was when we had a platform engineer on the team for about the first 3 versions. What do you do? What do you think keeps us, in brackets, as an industry from always doing that?
Oh, so many things. Sometimes it is just simply that there aren't enough of that specialty, whatever it is. Like it could be platform engineering, it could be somebody who has a testing background, it could be a designer, but there is some set of skills that are not typical to find on an engineering team that exist elsewhere in the organization. And the ideal would be to have the cross-functional team, the multidisciplined team that has all of those skills on it, but the organization is not staffed to allow that to happen with every team because there just aren't enough people. And then you end up with the people who have those specialty skills, multitasking and being split between multiple teams, and that can become incredibly unsustainable. So sometimes it's a staffing thing, sometimes it's a political thing. But I think that underlying this question, and I'm so glad that you asked it, is how do we get to this point where we can have all of these skills on the team so that we don't have the huge long delay of having to go out to the specialty group and then come back? Because when we look at what better looks like, and it's a reduction of friction from concept to delivery, one of the huge sources of friction is interdependency on other specialist teams who have their own set of priorities. And so I would invite a reflect and adapt on that as a cross-functional organization. It might be something that needs to get booted up to the leadership team, who should be operating as a team, to figure out how do we get to the place where you don't have an engineering team waiting on this other specialty. Instead, we've got it all within this specialty. And maybe the answer is going to be involve staffing differently. Maybe the answer is going to be this group over here becomes an enablement team. There are a variety of ways to approach it, but I totally feel your pain on that.
Thank you, Micha, for asking the question, and thank you for answering, Elisabeth. And there are no more other questions so far. And I think we're already, at 55 minutes. So I think that's okay. And I would really like to release you into your usual morning now, and walking the other dog as well. So again, Elisabeth, thank you so much. If any of you have any questions to us, to the ATD team, or to Elisabeth, please reach out. Best would be over our Slack workspace, or just write an email, whatever is easiest for you. And Elisabeth, I really, really hope that we see you again. I mean, you're not going to be in November in Germany, but maybe, we'll be back in the US or somewhere. So we really, really hope to see you. If not, we're going to stay in touch virtually. So thank you again for everything. And we both going to stay in so we can say goodbye privately. And to the rest, I hope you have a great afternoon, morning, wherever you are tuning in from. And make sure to share the replay, tell everybody else that wants to, or wants to learn more about what we just talked about. We're happy to share everything. So go ahead and do that, and have a wonderful day, and check out our website to get your ticket. Goodbye, everybody.